It was a Tuesday night, late, past midnight. I just crawled into bed after a long day at work. Amy was already fast asleep beside me, her face relaxed, peaceful. In that moment, everything seemed normal. Then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, half annoyed and ready to ignore it, but then saw it was from an unknown number. I opened it without much thought, expecting a spam ad or something. The message was brief, just one line. Your wife has been with other men. She's infected, and so are they. I sat up instantly, my stomach twisting into knots. I felt the blood drain from my face, my brain scrambling to make sense of what I was reading. Was this some sick joke? I stared at Amy lying beside me, her breathing steady. The idea seemed ridiculous, almost laughable. Yet, there was something dark in the pit of my stomach, a strange sense of dread that kept me glued to that screen. I didn't know what to do, who would send this, or what it even meant. But a quick glance back at the message pulled me into action. There was an attachment, a list of names. With a shaking hand, I clicked on it. My eyes traced over each name on the list, every line like a slap across the face. Jason, Mark, Liam, Sean. 15 men in total. I didn't know a single one, but my instinct screamed that this wasn't random. I scrolled back up to the top and stared at that word again. Infected. There was a part of me that didn't want to understand, that desperately hoped this was all a sick prank. But deep down, I knew this message wasn't fake. There was an urgency to it, a dark warning I couldn't ignore. My heart started racing as a flood of questions and doubts took over. Why hadn't I noticed anything before? Amy had been distant lately, but nothing screamed this. It was like I was seeing her in a different light, lying there, the woman I'd thought I knew like the back of my hand. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I picked up her phone. I unlocked it, shaking, feeling a strange mix of fear and anger. Scrolling through her messages, I started seeing traces of secrets, little breadcrumbs she'd tried to erase but hadn't quite managed. I found hidden conversations, some deleted so thoroughly that only fragments remained. Can't wait for tomorrow. Last night was amazing. Hope he doesn't find out. My heart pounded in my chest, each word confirming that this was real. I sat there. The room suddenly too quiet, every word I'd read ringing in my ears. Amy slept soundly next to me, oblivious, her face peaceful like nothing in the world could touch her. Part of me wanted to shake her awake right there, make her look me in the eyes, see the fury she'd lit in me. But another part, the more calculating side, wanted more. I needed to know everything before I made my move. So I kept digging. I scrolled through every app, every message, every hidden file. Amy had put effort into hiding this. Even though some texts were deleted, pieces of her conversations were buried in old app notifications, drafts she'd forgotten to erase. She'd clearly gone through some lengths to cover her tracks, but not far enough. I was putting it all together, like following a twisted puzzle she'd never expected me to see. As I pieced through the mess, her phone lit up with a message. From a number I didn't recognize. My chest tightened, and I opened it. Reading words I didn't expect. Tonight was amazing. I can still smell you. It was like a punch to the gut. Whoever he was, he wasn't just some fling. He was close, cocky enough to message her while she was lying next to me. I felt a strange numbness creep in, as if my body was shutting down my emotions to protect me. I read the message over and over until it blurred, like it would make the pain any easier to process. Then I did something I never imagined myself doing. I copied the number and went straight to my own phone. Who is this? I typed, my hands shaking. It didn't take long. Within seconds, 3 dots appeared. The reply was short. You know exactly who I am. I wanted to smash the phone, throw it across the room, but I forced myself to breathe, to hold steady. My thumb hovered over the screen, fighting between the urge to say something vicious and wanting him to confirm what I already suspected. Just making sure you know she's married. I typed back. A pause. Then a slow reply. Yeah, she mentioned you. The sheer audacity of it hit me like a wave. This man knew about me, and still, he'd been with her. He was comfortable enough to leave messages that sounded like trophies. I scrolled up through his past texts on her phone, digging further, and it all started becoming painfully clear. He wasn't alone. He was one of many, all strangers to each other but strangely familiar to her. There was no shame, no guilt, no indication that she had any intention of stopping. I sat there in the darkness, every image, every text burning into my mind. BY morning. I was running on fumes, my mind buzzing with everything I'd uncovered. Amy was up before me, moving around the kitchen like it was any other day, pouring coffee, scrolling through her phone without a care in the world. Watching her felt surreal, like I was seeing a stranger wearing my wife's face. I couldn't keep it in. The words tore out of me. Who the hell is Jason? I asked, my voice too calm, too cold. She froze, a hint of surprise flashing across her face. I could see her mentally scrambling, the wheels turning as she tried to gauge how much I knew. Then, without missing a beat, she put on that familiar, dismissive smile. Jason? She said, feigning innocence. I don't know any Jason. There it was, her first lie, cool as ice. I felt a rush of anger, my grip tightening around the edge of the counter. I stared her down, not saying a word, just waiting. After a tense pause, she finally looked away, adjusting her phone in her hand like it was the most important thing in the world. You're lying, Amy, I said, my voice low. I found everything. The messages, the names, the list. So why don't you try again? She looked up at me, her expression hardening. For the first time, I saw a flash of anger, as if I were the one who had wronged her. What, were you snooping through my phone? Wow, that's low, even for you, she snapped, like she'd caught me instead of the other way around. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You think I'm the problem here? I asked, almost laughing at the absurdity. I'm not the one sneaking around with half a dozen guys. She rolled her eyes, her face twisting into a smirk that felt more like a slap than anything she could have said. Oh, please, you think you're so perfect? You're boring. Okay? You don't see me, you don't get me. Maybe if you did, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. It was like a kick to the gut. I'd expected denial, maybe a little regret, some kind of remorse or shame, but instead, she was blaming me, as if her cheating was somehow my fault, as if I hadn't been doing everything I could to be a good husband, to make her feel loved, to keep us together. Wow, I said, shaking my head, trying to keep my voice steady. That's your excuse? I wasn't exciting enough for you? So you thought you'd just find a new guy every other weekend? Maybe I did, she said, her voice dripping with defiance. And maybe I liked it. The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring me to react, to explode. But I just stood there, frozen, feeling a numbness creep over me that was somehow worse than the anger. It was the cold realization that the woman standing in front of me, the woman I'd trusted, the woman I'd given everything to, had absolutely no intention of taking any responsibility. She didn't care that she was hurting me. In fact, she seemed to enjoy it. After she left for work, I sat alone in the kitchen, replaying the confrontation over and over in my mind. Her words echoed like they'd left a bruise. Maybe I liked it. Her smirk, that dismissive tone, the look in her eyes. All of it burned into my memory, fueling something darker inside me. It was a feeling I couldn't shake, a need to understand just how deep her betrayal ran. I opened my laptop and got to work. I started digging, not just through her phone but through every trace I could find of her life online. Old emails, hidden social media messages, even our shared cloud account. I combed through every detail, finding more and more signs of her double life, details she'd hidden just under the surface. She hadn't just been with these men. She'd been crafty about it, spinning a web of lies that had been right under my nose. There were receipts from restaurants I'd never been to, photos she'd sent to friends that I'd never seen, and locations I knew she'd lied about. I found entire weekends that she'd spent with family that were actually with someone else. A guy named Liam, another named Marcus, every name matching the list from that stranger's message. My hands trembled as I uncovered every piece, each one confirming how elaborate this all was. And then, buried deep in her messages, I found something else. A chat with one of her friends, Tara. Their conversation was a masterpiece of betrayal. They joked about the men, Amy talking about how thrilling it was to live a double life. She bragged about her own cleverness, how she'd convinced me to let my guard down by playing the role of a dutiful wife. But the worst part was the last message she'd sent to Tara, just 2 days ago. He's so clueless, It's almost sad. It's like he actually thinks he's enough. The words blurred as I read them. He actually thinks he's enough. I felt my grip tighten on the laptop until my knuckles turned white, my breath coming in sharp, cold gulps. It was like seeing myself through her eyes, realizing that I was nothing more than an afterthought, a placeholder in her life. I'd built my entire world around her, and she'd reduced me to a joke. A fool who actually thought he was enough. I wasn't just angry. I was humiliated. Sitting there, I knew I needed to respond, to do something more than just confront her. This wasn't just a matter of yelling or crying or begging for an explanation. Amy had made her choice. She'd chosen to live a life of secrets, of calculated deceit, of laughing at me behind my back. And now it was my turn to decide how this was going to end. My mind whirled with the possibilities, the different paths I could take from here. I thought about what would hurt her the most, what would make her realize exactly what she'd thrown away. And as I stared at that list of names, one idea started to form, taking root, filling me with a sense of cold clarity. If Amy wanted to live this life, to play this reckless game, then she was about to find out what it felt like to be on the other end of it. I spent the rest of that night carefully crafting my next steps. I couldn't just sit back and wait for her to come home, pretend I didn't know she was slipping through her lies like a snake. I had something better in mind. I took out my phone and dialed the first number from that list. Jason. The phone rang twice before someone picked up, his voice casual, almost indifferent. For a second, I didn't know if I could actually go through with this. But then I remembered every smirk, every joke she'd made at my expense, and the words came easily. "Hey, Jason," I said, calm as ice. "Just wanted to congratulate you." There was a pause on the line. Who is this?" "Oh, you know who I am?" I said, forcing a casualness into my voice that felt surreal. "I'm the husband of the woman you've been seeing, Amy. I hope she was worth it because you might want to get checked. Consider it my way of wishing you two the best of luck." Silence. He didn't even try to deny it, didn't try to cover anything up. I could practically feel his shock, the weight of it sinking in on the other end of the line. "Wait, what are you talking about?" he finally stammered, but I didn't stay on to explain. I hung up before he could say another word. One by one, I worked my way through the list. Corey, Paul, Liam. Each call a mix of shock, stammering confusion, and outright denial. I didn't give any of them a chance to argue or apologize. That wasn't the point. I was planting seeds of chaos, tearing down every wall of secrecy Amy had tried so hard to build. And with each call, a strange satisfaction started building inside me, something I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. By the time I reached the last name on the list, I felt strangely lighter, almost calm. I could picture the panic in each of these men, all scrambling to reach out to Amy, demanding answers, the web of lies she'd spun crashing down from every angle. And it was then that I decided to go one step further. I sent each of them the screenshots, the photos, the messages, the pieces of her secrets that I'd gathered. It was proof, undeniable and brutal, that none of them were special, that they were all just names on her long list of affairs. I wanted them to see her for what she was, wanted them to feel even a shred of the betrayal she'd thrown at me. I knew Amy was out with her friends that night, and I could picture her phone lighting up with messages from all these men, her perfect little arrangement spiraling out of control. She'd come home eventually, probably thinking she'd smooth it over, feed me some new lie to explain away her behavior. But when she came home, she'd find more than just a confrontation waiting for her. I didn't sleep, couldn't. I spent hours imagining Amy's face as each man texted her. Furious, betrayed, demanding explanations she couldn't possibly give. I could practically hear her phone buzzing, her world unraveling message by message, while she was clueless, thinking she still had everything neatly in control. But that wasn't enough. I wanted her to see exactly what she'd done, to face the whole ugly mess she'd created. So I went further. I printed out every piece of evidence, every text, every photo, every lie I'd uncovered. By the time I was done, I had a thick stack of pages that told the entire story of her deception. The dates, the names, the messages all laid out in black and white. I set them out on the kitchen table, spread like a dark exhibit. Each page was another strike, another reminder that she couldn't hide anymore. But I wasn't stopping there. I took her phone and, using the screenshots I'd sent to her partners, drafted a group message to every man on that list. Gentlemen, I hope you're all doing well. I've gathered you here because you all have something in common. Amy. She's been lying to all of you, just like she's lied to me. Then, I attached every screenshot, the ones that showed their messages alongside the others, revealing that each of them had been just one part of her game. I left the draft ready to go, only one press away from being sent. I wanted her to see it, to realize I had the power to expose her to everyone in her twisted circle. The final touch was one more printed photo. A candid, happy picture of us on our wedding day. I placed it right at the top of the stack, a reminder of the life we'd built, the promises she'd shattered without a second thought. I finished just as dawn was breaking. The quiet hum of the morning was deafening, and I sat there, staring at my work, waiting for the sound of her car in the driveway. Around 7 a.m., I heard the faint rumble of her engine. I sat up straighter, my heart pounding with a strange, anticipatory calm. She'd come home thinking she could slip back into her routine, that nothing had changed, that she still held all the cards. But as she stepped through that door, her whole life was about to flip upside down. The moment she walked in, her face shifted from mild exhaustion to confusion. She saw the papers laid out on the table, the wedding photo at the top, and froze. She glanced at me, eyes widening, then back at the table. Her mouth opened as if to say something, but no words came out. I didn't give her a chance to explain or deny. Instead, I gestured to the seat across from me, forcing her to face her own lies, laid bare in black and white. "Have a seat, Amy," I said, my voice steady and cold. "We have a lot to talk about." Amy's face shifted between emotions so fast, it was almost hard to keep up. Confusion, shock, anger, even a flash of fear. She stayed frozen near the door, her hand still gripping her purse, eyes darting across the table, taking in every damning piece of evidence. Her gaze landed on the group message, her own phone lying on the table, just a single tap away from exposing everything to every man she'd been stringing along. "Amy," I repeated, a low edge creeping into my voice. "Sit down." She finally moved, her face carefully blank, a mask settling over her features. She pulled out a chair, sitting down slowly, as if buying herself time. I watched her, waiting, letting the silence weigh heavy between us. "So, what exactly is all this?" she asked, her tone sharper than I expected. The nerve, the sheer nerve she had to sit there, feigning innocence, like she wasn't staring at the wreckage of our marriage laid out before her. But there was something else too, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. She still thought she could control this, twist it somehow. "What is this?" I echoed, forcing myself to keep my voice calm. "I think you know exactly what this is, Amy. Every message, every name, every single lie you've been feeding me for months, maybe even years." I pointed to her phone. "And that, ready to go out to all of them." For a second I thought I saw her crack. Her lips parted, and she looked down, as if the weight of it was finally sinking in. But then she straightened, crossed her arms, and gave me a smirk that only intensified the fury boiling inside me. "So what, you're just going to play the victim here? You're perfect, aren't you?" She shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're so predictable. You think I owe you an apology or something." Her words struck me like a slap, but this time I was ready. "I don't want your apology, Amy. I just want the truth. No more excuses, no more gaslighting. Just admit what you did." She looked away, rolling her eyes in exaggerated frustration, her mask slipping for a brief moment. "Fine. You want the truth? You've been dull for years, Tom. Years. I had to do something to feel alive. Something exciting that wasn't just you." Each word hit like a hammer, but I held steady. I knew now that this wasn't about me. It was about her, her selfishness, her hunger for something she couldn't even define. "So that's your excuse? You're bored. So you think cheating on me with a list of strangers is somehow justified?" I felt a bitter laugh bubbling up, my anger threatening to break through the surface. "Do you realize how pathetic that sounds? Pathetic." She leaned forward, her face twisting in anger. "I did what I had to do. You were the one who never saw me, who never listened, who took me for granted. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time I didn't feel sadness. I felt pity. She was fighting so hard to turn this on me, to escape accountability, that she couldn't see how small she'd become. How empty. So this is it then? I said quietly, the anger draining out of me, leaving only a hollow calm. You're not sorry. You're not even ashamed. She stared back at me, defiant to the end, refusing to back down. And that's when I realized. This marriage, the woman I'd once loved, everything I'd sacrificed for, it was all already over. She was too far gone to ever come back from this, and she'd chosen her path. Now it was time for me to choose mine. I sat back, looking at the stranger across from me, wondering how I'd ever missed who she truly was. Her face was unreadable now, her eyes dark and guarded. There was no regret, no sense of guilt, just a hardened, bitter woman, grasping at whatever control she thought she had left. The silence between us was thick, both of us weighing our next moves. I don't think you fully understand what's happening here, Amy, I said, my voice almost gentle. This isn't a fight you're going to win. You've lied, cheated, humiliated me, and you're sitting there acting like you're the one with the moral high ground. But you're not. She let out a short, mocking laugh. You act like I care about what you think of me. I've been living my life, Tom. You were just part of the background, a steady paycheck, someone to keep the house in order. You should be grateful I stayed this long. Her words stung, but not in the way she wanted them to. Instead of anger, I felt clarity, an understanding of just how twisted this all had been, how little she valued anything we'd built. For her, it was all a means to an end, and I was just a convenience. Grateful? I asked, more amused than hurt. That's rich. I think I've done enough of that, don't you? Grateful to be lied to. Grateful to be used. Grateful to be ignored. She rolled her eyes, visibly bored. Can we cut to the part where you storm off and leave me in peace? Her arrogance was breathtaking. Gladly, I replied, my tone colder than I'd intended. But not before I leave you with something to remember. I reached for her phone. The group message still open. Every name and screenshot I'd gathered. Her eyes followed my hand, and for the first time, her confidence faltered. She saw the names, the men she'd so carelessly cycled through, and her face went pale. Don't you dare, Tom, she hissed, her voice dropping to a low, venomous tone. You'll ruin everything. You'll what? I asked, finally seeing her for who she was. Destroy me? I think you've already done that, Amy. The only difference is now you get to watch as it all comes crashing down. Her eyes were wild, desperate, realizing just how little power she had left. I held up her phone, my thumb hovering over the send button. She lunged, reaching for it, her expression twisted in panic, but I was faster. I pressed down, watched the message go through, watched her life implode before her eyes. In an instant, her phone lit up with a torrent of notifications. Names flashing, messages flooding in, her carefully constructed world shattering with every vibration. She tried to grab it from me, but I held it out of her reach, watching her mask crumble as the full weight of what I'd done sank in. You think this is going to end with me? I asked, my voice steely. This is just the beginning. Every single lie, every single man, every single betrayal, you're going to feel every ounce of it. Her face contorted with rage and desperation, and for the first time, I saw her really afraid. She looked at me, finally grasping that she wasn't in control, that she was at the mercy of the very person she tried so hard to ruin. And as she sat there, her phone still buzzing with the consequences of her actions, I stood up, calm, steady, and walked away, leaving her alone in the rubble of her own making. That I walked out of the kitchen, the faint sound of her phone's relentless buzzing fading as I moved further down the hall. My hands were steady now, my mind sharper than it had been in days. I knew Amy was probably still sitting at the table, reading each message as they poured in. Accusations, confusion, maybe even anger. In the hallway, I took a deep breath, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the silence sink in. All the tension that had gripped me for so long was releasing, unraveling slowly, and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months settled in. She could no longer weave her web of lies in the dark. I'd thrown light on every piece of her deception. It wasn't long before I heard her coming down the hall, her footsteps hard and fast, her breathing quick with a mix of anger and panic. I turned, watching her storm toward me, her face pale, her eyes blazing. She looked more vulnerable, almost cornered, like a predator caught in its own trap. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" she spat, her voice barely above a whisper, thick with venom. "You had no right, none, to ruin my life like this." I let out a hollow laugh, crossing my arms as I met her gaze. "Ruin your life? Amy, I didn't ruin it. You did that on your own. I just finally gave you a front row seat to the disaster you created." Her hands balled into fists, and for a moment I thought she might actually lash out. Instead, she took a step back, her face crumbling as she struggled to regain her composure. "You don't understand anything," she hissed, her voice breaking. "This wasn't supposed to happen. I was managing everything fine until you had to stick your nose in where it didn't belong." "Managing?" I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. "You were managing me, Amy. You thought you'd just keep me in the dark forever? That I'd never figure out what was going on right under my nose?" She looked away, her expression shifting from anger to something else, something closer to desperation. "Fine. I made mistakes, Tom, but we can still fix this. Just delete the messages. I'll explain it to them. Say it was all a misunderstanding." "It's over, Amy," I interrupted, my voice cold and final. "You can't twist this into something it's not. This isn't a story you can rewrite." The realization must have hit her then because her face fell, and I saw, for the first time, a flicker of true regret. Whether it was regret for what she'd done or regret for being caught, I wasn't sure. She stood there, her eyes glistening, looking at me with an expression that might have broken me once. But now, it just felt empty, like the words we'd said over the years that no longer meant anything. "What do you want, then?" she asked, her voice quieter, almost pleading. "Are you really going to throw everything away because of this?" "You threw it away," I said simply, realizing how true it was even as I said it. "You decided to gamble everything, and you lost. There's nothing left to save." She looked like she wanted to argue, to throw some last insult or excuse, but she didn't. She just stood there, silent, as if finally understanding that there was nothing she could say, no apology or excuse that would change anything. In the silence that followed, I felt an odd sense of closure, the finality of it settling over me like a weight lifting. The love, the trust, the life we'd shared. It was all gone, and so was the grip she'd had over me. I turned away, heading toward the door without looking back, ready to start fresh, away from the ashes of what once was. Behind me, I heard her soft, shuddering breath, but I didn't turn around. I stepped outside, feeling the early morning air hit my face, crisp and cool. The quiet was soothing, a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left inside. I closed the door behind me, hearing the faint sounds of her movements, probably pacing, maybe already trying to salvage what little control she could still pretend to have. But that was her problem now, not mine. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of her lies. I wasn't the husband tied to an illusion, bending over backward to make her happy while she played a part and laughed behind my back. No, that part of my life was done. The realization gave me a strange sense of freedom, like shedding a second skin I hadn't known I was wearing. I got in my car, sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, taking in the emptiness of the road ahead. And then, without a second thought, I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. My brother, Alex. I'd lost touch with him over the years, a casualty of Amy's isolating influence. She'd always had a way of steering me away from people who saw through her, who knew I deserved better. The phone rang twice before he picked up, his voice groggy. "Tom? It's early, man. Everything okay?" For a moment, I didn't know what to say, where to start. But then it hit me. I didn't need to explain everything to him, not now. Just hearing his voice was grounding, like finding a way back to myself. "Hey, Alex," I replied, my voice steady. "I was just thinking of coming by, if that's okay." He didn't ask questions, didn't press for details. "Of course, Tom. Anytime." I knew just from his voice that he understood. He'd seen through Amy long before I had, tried to warn me, but I'd shut him out, too stubborn, too committed to see the truth. Now I felt a pang of regret, but more than that, I felt relief. I was finally breaking free. As I pulled out of the driveway, A weight seemed to lift with each passing mile. Memories of Amy's words, her anger, her twisted excuses, they all started to fade, replaced by a quiet resolve I hadn't felt in years. I didn't need her validation, her approval, or even her acknowledgement. I was walking away from the life I'd built with her. But in doing so, I was finding something I hadn't realized I'd lost, myself. And as I drove away, I felt the faintest hint of a smile tugging at my lips. The future was uncertain, messy, and unknown, but it was mine. Free of lies, free of her games, free to rebuild from the ground up. A few days passed, and with each one, the chaos Amy had created became something that existed in my rearview mirror, a storm I'd left behind. Staying at Alex's place felt like stepping back into a life I'd forgotten, a life without Amy's control, where I didn't have to weigh every decision, every word, in a fragile balance to keep her happy. For the first time in years, I felt grounded. On the third morning, I woke up early, drawn by the quiet. I made myself a cup of coffee, letting the steam rise in the early light, and sat down at the small kitchen table in my brother's apartment. For the first time since everything had happened, I finally let myself breathe, let the enormity of it all sink in. Alex joined me, silently setting a mug down across from me, the brotherly understanding between us needing no words. We sat in the calm, and as he finally asked me what I was going to do next, I realized I had a choice I hadn't felt in a long time. This wasn't a crossroads I'd feared anymore. It was a clean slate, an invitation to rebuild. What I'm going to do next? I repeated, thinking about it. I don't know, Alex, but I know what I'm not going to do. I'm done letting someone else define me. He nodded, a slow smile creeping onto his face. About time, Tom. You deserve better than what she put you through. And he was right. I'd spent so long shrinking myself to fit into a life that had nothing real left in it, clinging to something that had only ever existed in my imagination. Now, with the distance growing between me and that old life, I could see clearly how much I'd sacrificed of myself, all for someone who never saw any value in it. Over the next few weeks, I focused on reconnecting with the people I'd lost touch with, people who cared about me, who were genuinely happy to see me. Friends, family, old coworkers. They all welcomed me back with warmth and compassion I hadn't felt in years. They listened without judgment, without questions, letting me speak or stay silent as I needed. One afternoon, I started packing up my things from the house I'd shared with Amy. The process was strange, like picking up pieces of a life I'd outgrown. Memories surfaced, but they felt distant, as though they belonged to someone else. I took only what was truly mine: clothes, a few keepsakes, books that I'd loved. The rest, I left it all behind, leaving her to sort through the remnants of a life she'd destroyed. By the time I'd finished, I felt a profound sense of freedom. I locked up, walked down the front steps, and didn't look back. Starting over was daunting, but it was also exhilarating. Each day, I took another step toward rediscovering who I was, what I wanted, and what I deserved. I hadn't thought I'd find peace so soon, but in leaving that life, I discovered something unexpected. A quiet strength, a resilience that had survived even the darkest days. And as I moved forward, I knew that whatever came next would be my choice, my journey, a life of honesty and respect that I wouldn't compromise for anyone. I had come through the fire, and now, for the first time in years, I was truly free.